Hi, thank you guys for coming out today. I'm Jamie Poissant. I'm an assistant professor at UCF, and I teach in the MFA program here, where I also help advise the GWA, the Graduate Writers Association, which has kindly used their funds to bring Matt Pitt here to us today. And you're about to meet Matt and hear him read. Matt's going to read for 20 to 30 minutes, and then he's going to talk. His talk is specifically geared toward professions in writing outside of academia. He's kind of been a jack of all trades, and so for a number of you who are interested in various paths and routes to making your way in the world as a writer post-undergrad or grad school that don't necessarily involve the ivory tower, he'll speak to that a little, even though he's recently joined the ivory tower himself. But let me go ahead and introduce him. Matt Pitt, or Matthew Pitt, is a more interesting person than I am. I learned this in 2008 when Matt and I were together in attendance at the Bread Loaf Writers Conference. I was eating breakfast, and for breakfast I was eating a bowl of Lucky Charms. Other people in the cafeteria, writers who did yoga, were eating granola and yogurt and various health foods. And I decided that I was cool because I was the only one with Lucky Charms. Then this guy sits down next to me, and he has a bowl of Lucky Charms. I hated him immediately. I looked, and upon closer inspection, I saw that he had sprinkled raisins into his Lucky Charms. Raisins in his charms! Which made him not only cooler than me, but also weirder. And so I really hated him. I came to forgive Matt after I had read his story, The Mean and Best New American Voices, and realized that he had a singular voice and was a master of the short story. I couldn't help falling in love with him in a purely platonic and healthy way after reading his collection, Attention Please Now, stories from which first appeared in the Oxford American, the Southern Review, the Colorado Review, Witness, the Robert Allen Butler Prize Stories Anthology, and elsewhere. Matt has been a scholar and a fellow to the Swanee Writers Conference and a scholar to the Bread Loaf Writers Conference. He holds an MFA from NYU, where he was a New York Times Fellow, and is now an assistant professor of fiction at Texas Christian University. To continue the saga slightly, today at Moe's, I ordered a burrito with everything on it. Matt proceeded to order a burrito with everything on it, plus cucumbers. I am trying to make up my mind whether or not I hate him again. Either way, I can see that he is cooler than me and weirder, and I think that you will also see this in his fiction, which I hope you will enjoy. I'm happy to present Matt Pitt.
What Jamie left out of the story is that he came to learn last night when we had dinner that I put cucumbers and raisins on everything. So when we ordered and we decided to split dishes, and there were, the shriveled grapes on top of our fettuccine. She just, it was rough. It was rough going. But he was a trooper and ate every bite. Thank you so much. Thanks so much to Jamie for the introduction, and thank you so much to the GWA for hosting me today and for inviting me to your campus. I'm delighted to be here, and it's been a really long time since I was last in Orlando. The last time I visited was with my parents and ended with an incident on Space Mountain, which I'm going to try really hard not to repeat while I'm here today. So hopefully this goes better, and there will be fewer temper tantrums. I'm going to read a triptych of fiction. Instead of going with one piece, I'm going to read parts of three. Actually, two whole short pieces that are sandwiched around one slightly longer novel excerpt. So that's unprecedented for me. We'll find out later if it was unprecedented for a good reason or not. But I actually, it did seem to fit the hour and the shape of the talk and some of the things that I'm hoping that we'll discuss in Q&A. So I just kept coming back to it and couldn't let go. I'm going to put this like really far out of view to do a Marco Rubio moment later. But so I'm reading a short fiction piece, then a novel excerpt, and I think Jamie's class has learned about my novel, but I'll set it up a little bit for those who haven't, and then follow up with another very short piece that was just out recently, late last year. So the first piece gives me the opportunity to break out the coolest DIY design journal that I think I've ever been in. This is an issue of Forklift, Ohio, and I don't know if you can tell, but there are like all these little styrofoam dots that are beneath this laminated cover, and they're all handmade like that. I can't remember how many copies Matt Hart puts out in the press run for Forklift, Ohio, but each issue is handmade and designed, and I love reading from it, and I love the pieces of the dots fall off on me each time I open it. So this first piece is a really short story that I was asked to write. The editors asked me if I would write. I'd started doing food criticism and food reviews, and they wanted to see if I could write a short story, a short fiction that was also a food review. And so that was the challenge, and so this is what came of it. This is called Appetites. Appetites. Garnish. Reviewed by Willem Timmons. Cost, moderate to pricey. Garnish, a new bistro tucked away in our city's Pier District, has, for me, sat for weeks like a coveted Christmas present, waiting beneath a trimmed spruce. Each time this reviewer sauntered by, the glow and bonhomie emanating from its oval windows stirred an overriding anticipation. I had heard whispers of its charm, praising Garnish's impeccable decor, giddy dishes, and especially its young, striking chef de cuisine, Talisa Yarborough, who had recently returned stateside after a stint in Provence. This week, my chance at last arrived to appraise Yarborough's assets. The early returns were thrilling. The menu was adventurous yet accessible, espousing a grand tour of Europe alongside alluring African and Latin taste trinkets. Tall ciabatta triangles greeted me at my table, served vertically in plates of olive oil like sailboats skimming the sea. The bread achieved an earthy balance of hydration. I asked if the lovely Chef Yarborough might join me for a curtain call, but the staff declined. Minutes later, Yarborough's vision took hold within a sumptuous amuse-bouche featuring a dollop of lobster, sliced shallots, a sprinkle of cinnamon, and a single marigold petal. Again, I called on my server to fetch Miss Yarborough, this time with vino, so we might discuss her enticing array. Again, my request was rebuffed. My wine steward, Jason, did at least tote me back a bottle to my table this time, a semi-dry white that bathed me in memories of France. A brilliant choice, confidently infused with a pert pear finish, clearly from Etienne Valley, where I had embarked upon a youthful summer sojourn. Had Miss Yarborough done so too? Had we once tread similar paths? I informed Jason that our meeting had been delayed far too long. Could he send for Talisa? And also notify her of my wish that we embark upon a post-meal get-to-know-you stroll. I thought we might hustle a digestif out her back door, admire the light chop of pier waves as my stomach settled, and relish one another's impeccable taste. Jason returned. This time, tasty Talisa approached too, arresting as advertised. Her figure, even within a chef's starchy garb, was delicate, graceful. But she fielded my questions tersely, ruffled, no doubt, by my professional standing. To relax her, I innocently mused about the prospects of our pier stroll. In response, she waved her left hand in my face. Adorned with an engagement ring, it flared with vulgar intensity. With a thin smile, she pounded back to her culinary cave. Perhaps it's just as well she did, because beginning with the next dish, garnish's luster faded. I wish I didn't have to report on the missteps miring my meal. Alas, though I did graduate cum laude from the College of Docile Politeness, I get paid by the word, so let's let it rip. For soup, she sent out a sullied, pasty cucumber gazpacho, flat as a failed knock-knock joke, devoid of freshness. I wondered if Yarborough's obsession with scoring, say, the finest wedding florist, had led her to disregard the bouquet in her own soup course. At any rate, I have witnessed Iron Maiden concert T-shirts with more nuance. Then came further wine pairings. These were so predictably boorish. Better to bind them in one paragraph. A Rhone that made me groan, a Shiraz better suited to paint, strip, and sip, and a Cabernet that caused my tongue to flay. None of Talisa's selections were toxic, but nor were they any more refined than the Pabst Blue Ribbon my uncle insists on siphoning at family functions. And now we come, God help us, to appetizers. Speak of unrefined. After this debacle, I wouldn't trust Yarborough with club crackers and cheese whiz, let alone honest-to-God hors d'oeuvres. I forced back my gag reflex through a dish of shellfish, not seared so much as vanquished, then dragged on a deathbed of oily sautéed baby fennel. Should a scallop really look and taste like alabaster? My instincts told me no. Her errant offerings may have been a failed attempt to please me, chef sensing that my palate clearly overmatched hers, or that her fiancé couldn't match my merits. While that is a pity, I cannot allow compassion to cloud my writing. And so onward. Talisa's next pathetic parlor trick was pibille, shredded pork ropes marinated in achiote pepper. At least I was told it was pork. It could as well have been strips from leather boots. Finally, they brought a 10-ounce fillet wheeled out in, I suppose, a crash cart. I did request that my steak be served rare, but I'd hoped it would indulge at least in a brief affair with a flame. This, readers, was not rare fare. This slab of beef had been a recent victim of vehicular slaughter, flanked by a quivering mass of risotto bystanders. Look at that beef, I thought. Look at the tread marks. Cooper tires, a fine brand. Poor beast probably never felt a thing. I could sympathize. Like that unfortunate creature, Talisa had run me down. Not with four-wheel drive, but rudeness. This neglect I suffered at Garnish, culinary and otherwise, may be emblematic of the chef's private issues. Say, discord with management over the menu. Or perhaps an unsatisfied need in her private life. If this is indeed the case, and Talisa is getting meager portions in the bedroom, my condolences. But don't force diners to suffer your dashed desires. And, olive branch extending, do know that if I can help alleviate such a craving, my phone lies waiting in my pants pocket, ready to be rung by you. So, thank you. So the second piece is from the novel, and the novel, this excerpt is from a novel called Tear Here, and the graduate students, I think, know that it draws from characters that first appeared in the collection. So a couple of short stories, they made appearances, and I just couldn't let go of them. So, and by the way, thanks for reading the collection to the graduate students. Thanks again. So this is the first proper chapter. There's a prologue. There are a couple of frame chapters called zero chapters. And so there's one of those before this that just follows a first-person perspective of one of the band members after all this has taken place, who's witnessing the carnage of what happened, a la Marlowe in Heart of Darkness or Ishmael and Moby Dick. So this scene follows that first prologue, and it also links up to one of the stories that features the characters. So this is chapter 1, Tear Here. You've done this before, right? Stay with me, man. Don't go ADD. When you squirm, I fidget. But I gotta squirm. You already slapped me once for speaking, then again for sighing, and if I can't breathe loud, my lung will break. So you gotta grant me some bodily release. Liddy, if you've never done this before, she had done it before, but never with intent to harm. If Liddy did this thing to Ramsey just right, meaning just wrong, their group would be a six-pack again within the hour. It all depended on the precise improper placement of the needle. She had to fail delicately or the asshole would sue. And really, precious little information existed on how to make a piercing puncture ugly. Plenty of times, she assured Ramsey, not caressing his nostrils so much as prodding them, the way a child might a glob of glue. She winked at the rest of the band, lounging in various corners of the dusty, ghostly donut shop they'd used for rehearsal space since its abandonment months before. Swear? Tons of noses. Did one once in the dark, even. You shut that light off, Liddy, and I swear. Ramsey's stomach growled, acid of fear folding into the acid from a hearty lunch they'd just enjoyed. Ramsey had no idea this hearty lunch would be the last meal he'd share with his bandmates, who collectively comprised Some Assault, a group so close to greatness they were practically dry humping it. A lunch made all the more delicious for the fact that they'd scored it for free, right on down to the butter slabs. Mikey had brought along his own double-paneled black vinyl check presenter to the meal, had parked his rusting Dodge Shadow 2 blocks from the restaurant, careful to leave the doors unlocked. They ate like fat camp failures. 5 courses flooded with creams and gravies. If they'd worn belts, they would have had to let out a loop. At meal's end, Mikey asked the server for the check. The moment she left to retrieve it, Mikey waved his empty check holder at the restaurant manager, signaling that the group had already settled up and they didn't need their change. By the time the server returned with the band's actual bill, the Dodge was already hauling ass down the streets of Milwaukee. Very tragical mirth. Merry and tragical? Tedious and brief? That is hot ice and wondrous strange snow. Jill, shut it, Ramsey yelled. I'm nervous enough as it is without you acting all Phantom of the fucking Opera. Jill was running lines. He'd landed the role of Theseus in his high school's fall production of A Midsummer Night's Dream, a part he took very seriously, since the drama director had agreed to excuse Jill's massive truancy perp sheet if he performed, but blow even one line during the show's run, and he'd spend the rest of the year in detention plus the F. We will, fair queen, up to the mountain's top, and mark the musical confusion of hounds and echo in conjunction. Liddy, all right, just make the whole already, before fair queen recites the whole play. Ramsey then suggested, for maybe the 12th time in 10 minutes, that the needle Liddy was wielding looked way longer than necessary. She retorted that she had to overdo the initial hole in the middle of his nose so that the jewelry would expand inside the hole and then properly fill the space. Yeah, then, well, maybe just, do my lobe first. We can see how that goes. Sure, yeah, I understand. I had a girl puss out on me the same way once. And that was it. Ramsey lifted his chin defiantly. She held the needle beside his temple a moment, toying with him. Then she lowered it to the edge of his nasal septum. She gestured in Kyle's direction, and he took out the big bandage. Here came the sting. A few moments later, after Ramsey stopped writhing and screaming and had blotted the bloodstains with his shirt collar, he pivoted gingerly to a handheld mirror, like a wounded soldier from a war movie who can't bear to look at his broken face. Oh, boo-hoo, asshole, spat Liddy derisively. You are such a piece of scurf. An infection developed over the coming days, and Ramsey, who had no health coverage, waited until his nose changed color 5 times before finding a free clinic. The doctor there examined the crusted paste inside his patient's nostril, resembling a splotch of frozen Vegemite. He told Ramsey he was lucky he'd caught it in time. Didn't he know the nose shares blood with the brain? His brain wasn't using the blood anyway, Liddy said, when told this news in Mr. Shale's remedial math class. She'd heard about the medical complications secondhand, since Ramsey quit the band the day she gored him, the result she'd hoped for. She'd been ramping up to axe Ramsey for weeks, but didn't want to announce it at a band meeting. Too genteel, too elegant. Besides, he could talk back. While he could play the piano, he had no style of his own, other than to steal styles from others. That was Liddy's issue. Sometimes Ramsey was the killer, bashing the board like the white keys were carnival whack-a-moles. Sometimes he played sprightly, like Ellington, fingers built for snatching shortbread from a cookie jar. Other times he played like some clownish street performer. You'd expect a monkey to twirl beside him, collecting tips. Fine for gigs and giggles, but if the band was actually going to record their demo, they had to cut him. And Liddy was happy to handle this. She wanted to see him howling and grubbing for rubbing alcohol. Retribution for his bad attitude and recent negative write-up in the Journal Sentinel. And for his whining about the tiny kitchen in his cramped studio apartment when it had been weeks since Liddy had eaten a single dinner whose instructions hadn't included the words, "stir in contents of sauce packet." She tolerated people who possessed everything, but detested anyone who barely owned more than she did. So the fat had been trimmed. They were down to Liddy, Jilt, Claw, Mikey, and Dan, and Kyle in the booth. To celebrate, they worked on a big brick of bud Jilt had scored, encircling the block like mice on cheese, examining the cannabis with the scrutiny of jewelers, filtering seeds, obsessing for the perfect yield inside. The puff Liddy took felt good for maybe 5 minutes. Then Mikey told her he couldn't make Sunday's rehearsal, and she again felt filled with the spirit of spring cleaning. She considered how little she'd mind Mikey's total departure. Yeah, true, he had no inhibitions at shows, but on the flip side, no ambitions. It was the same worn-out strutting with him, gig after gig. You know, we do got to address how Ramsey's van was like our only big vehicle. How are we going to cart your drum kit now? She breathed out her spoiled hit at Dan. She wasn't a fucking moron. She knew they relied on the van to travel to gigs, and that the gypsy cab service Ramsey ran out of that van, serving classmates with suspended or revoked licenses, netted the band a few bucks each week. But attaining purity in sound had its consequences. She put down her bone and twitched. Night was too close to falling. The twin buzz of getting high and quarreling over musical direction had deceived her yet again into denying she was homeless. Now she had to pick from her assortment of pathetic options. Chance the street or meet the social worker. Slip into the window of her latest merry-go house, hoping her foster family didn't see her before she climbed back out the next morning. She could no longer recall the last cleansing breath or even decent one she'd drawn. Even when she found a bed to bounce into, she stayed awake most of the night, counting the people she could call at this hour if her luck ran out. Much as she hated high school, at least the classroom was a cage, obligated to admit and house her during daylight hours. She fingered a photo she'd ripped out of a classmate's yearbook, felt the jagged tenderness where she'd torn, looked quickly at it. His features were faded from just 1 week, nestled in her pocket. Would he take her in? She'd so far spent just the one night in his house. So why was his door the first she thought of? Why had he shown her where to find a spare key? "I'm working on a new client," she declared to the band. "We'd get him his stuff late each Tuesday. Steady paycheck, definitely good for the green. If he's in for heavy doses. The guy will need a stash, I mean a tall one." "Praise Allah," Jilt said. "My wallet has not had tenants in weeks." He blew his nose into a Slurpee cup. "So does our benefactor, got a name? We gonna deal with this guy the way we usually do? And take him where we usually do?" 20 after 4 on Tuesdays. The chimps went berserk. Their mayhem followed an arc, source midpoint apogee to trace it on a rose compass. First the troop would pet the safety glass lightly, as though consoling it. Then they'd prowl the perimeter of their cage, feet and knuckles skimming concrete. This was a warning, It meant their hearts were getting hotter, meant they were close to getting mean. They took it out on the bars. The chimps rattled the iron, clamping down, wailing to be let in on whatever secret it was outside they could smell and hear but not see. Sometimes the head zookeeper would forget to put up their toys. That was when Tuesdays howled. The primates hurled wiffle balls, spinning tops, rattles, and building blocks at the bars. The noises were spiky, arrhythmic, relentless. The chimps didn't let up for hours. By then, Charles Shales and his high school students had killed their joints, cashed their pipes, and vacated the hideout. By then, they'd left the Milwaukee Zoo, gathered their paraphernalia, having taken pains not to leave behind traces of their festivities under the scaffolding behind the monkey house. They trusted the harsh winter winds to scatter the scent of the drugs by morning, and the chimp's memory of the commotion to dull and fade. The group would ask Shales if he wanted to hang with them, but Shales would decline. He'd have to come home and get his head unclouded in a hurry. Shales would have work to do in preparation for tomorrow's remedial algebra classes. Maybe, say, 100 papers to grade on the associative property, with a blue pencil and a bag of salt and vinegar potato chips his only anchors. The high from the joints would be all but dried, just a small static gristle scatting somewhere in his head. But the pain wouldn't be back yet. That was the main thing. He figured he could barrel through most of his stack before the pain supplanted the pleasure. After washing the skunkin' zoo from his hands, Shales would pop in live bootleg tapes of Liddy's band, listen for her crisp drum work, urgent four counts, and harmony vocal. He'd bend over and tap his fingers against the speaker's head bobbing. The band was confident, brash, numinous. They sounded, as rock should, like polished hell. The first 10 papers that Shales graded would actually be fine, but then he'd come to some kid who argued, say, that the associative property made every integer negative once what was outside the parenthesis multiplied with the numbers inside it. But this kid wouldn't call the process multiplication. He'd call it claiming. He'd write for a sample problem, 1 times, open parentheses, 4 plus 1, close parentheses, equals -5, and then explain his reasoning. When the first one is claimed by the 4 and the other one, it's all bad. The first number is now a minus, and so is the second. Whatever numbers are inside the parenthesis have huge control over the other number, no matter how much bigger that other number is. And Shales would check the kid's name on the front of the paper and wince. "You're wrong in every way," Shales wrote, "but you show your work well." He'd draw a C. Then a twinge would kick up just beneath the skin. He tried not to look at the clock, mentally punishing himself when he took 2 glances in the same minute, wondering when Liddy would be finished with her show, when she'd slip into his room and climb in his bed. So last piece. This is, again, another short, very short flash fiction, and it's one that came out last year online for the Goodman Project. And it's about a group of guys who have bought a broken down airplane. Frequent flyers. Me, LaTroy, and one other friend went in on buying this baby 2 years ago. 86-seater, decommissioned when its discount airline goes belly up. After 3 decades faithful floating, intercontinental soaring, this jet was just chained to a semi, getting towed to a new location, about to be gutted for parts. But the rigging snapped on the trip, right? Things swerved off-road and tumbled all the way down this gully. And once that happened, we were able to buy it pretty cheap enough. Only a couple other bidders. There's not many want to bust a jet with a cockpit you can't even see treetops from. Thing can't take us anywhere anymore, but it still gets us plenty of places. You can't imagine the royal coup this was, presenting for the pleasure of our girls at the time, not some slinky dress or night in a casino, but a whole mode of goddamn transport. Our current girls like it too. LaTroy and me don't think these latest girls will last long, but at least they play stewardess. Ones before didn't. We couldn't convince those ones to loosen. They kept thinking police would raid our bird. Well, okay. Say they did. Impounded it, Welded the hull? Where were they going to move the fucker? We stabbed stale pretzel bits from seat pockets for snacks. Moistened them with beers, light joints to improve the taste. Why do they call the feeling stoned when all you feel after smoking is altitude? Like you're gaining on, then overshooting the atmosphere. We aren't stoned. We are happy and calm and cruising. Dory, LaTroy's new girl, announces she did it once in a plane lavatory. Well, 1/2 times, actually. We commend her. Mile High Club! Wondering what's involved in half a time. Before the flight, during a mechanical delay, she explains. Strictly pre-boarding. LaTroy and me stay quiet, unsure if her remarks are about the flight or the fuck. Well, shit, Barb, my girl says, peeling her shirt back. Can't let you outdo me. She strips to undies, pings a thumb against my zipper. Let's you and me get some front seat bucking, pilot. I race to the cockpit, grab my hat, and flip the still working intercom. Folks, this is your captain. You kindly take your seats. I illuminated the fasten seatbelt sign. In a few minutes, me and my girl will be shaking us out some rough old turbulence. After, the girls don bikinis and we splash in the creek. Floating downstream on our backs, hugging the seat upholstery, delivered to our vacation destination. So where's this plane taking you? Anywhere we damn well desire. Iceland, Scotland, Peru, Netherlands. Is that where you dropped off your friend? Dory's talking about Andre. We don't talk about Andre. Dory won't stop, though. The one who's not with you. I don't understand why we never bump into him or invite him on trips. He paid for the plane too, right? Rows 1 through 7 are his. Dory darn, Barb says, paddling over. I think their deal's terms went bad. So Dory finally quiets up, soaks her glistening forehead with creek water. Only now that she's dropped it, LaTroy and me can't. We climb out, fetch towels. Eventually the girls follow. You can't let your rides back to town leave you in a ditch. Andre was our other partner in the plane escapade. He had a girl too, but their thing turned crucial. He cleaned up, stopped just clocking at his job, said he'd become a whole new man, but LaTroy and me mumbled, no, just the asshole part. Watching a guy who used to be like you go all of a sudden serious looks ridiculous. Andre started saying, doing things for real he used to say, do his jokes. LaTroy and me shot off his balls when we'd get high together, but he still yapped about all the real places we could steer and bank our wings if they really worked, like he was leader of his own damn heavens. Andre's wedding was the last place we really talked to him. He went to Cabo, really went, on his honeymoon. Came back just long enough to buy maps and shovel out shit from the house we all shared. In the years since, he sent us postcards from Bermuda, Guatemala, a bunch of places we used to pretend to be. But I told you I didn't want to tell about this guy. Why didn't you stop me? Layover done, hungry as hell, we hop in for our lunch meal. Only we forget to open the exits and air out our jet, so our shrink-wrapped sandwiches stink of baked mayo. LaTroy says, let's play air marshal. We flip a coin and I win. So I get to be the hero, he's got to play Arab perp. Dory cranks the speakers for in-flight entertainment, one song piping out on repeat. It was a good day. In this game, I get the shotgun. LaTroy's armed only with a spork from our to-go bags. We play several episodes and our girls watch with glee. Dory times us. How long does it take to disable LaTroy when we're 6 rows apart? 10. At opposite ends of the cabin. Then Barb says, okay, now let me be an obstacle. You got to get LaTroy before he cuts Dory, right? But I'm all in the aisle, stupid tourist, digging around in the overhead. Even though I already fucked Barb today, I still want to impress her. Racing down the aisle, I vault over a row of seats. It shaves seconds off my time. Only I land in a hole, made from where we ripped out one of the seat cushions to float down the creek. My ankle drops right in, buckles. I feel it puff like it's been snake bit. Injury's going to lay me out a week, maybe 2. Worse, I can't pull myself out. My other foot plunged into the next door seat crack, and the cushion has closed all around me. The more I twist and yank, more I twist and yank, more I sink. And the whole cabin is laughing. Whoa, says Dory. You just vanished there, Marshall, in our hour of need. Barb's in hysterics too. So much for being a trusty flotation device. Can't even hold you up outside of water. Looking at my mirror, not a jacker in sight. The song's still going on. I must look so not a hero. Finally, I rip my way out of the seat folds, and before I know, I'm up the aisle, forearm shivering LaTroy. All right, drop the weapon, towelhead. Back off the lady, dig. Normally, I'd slap him in the bicep, we'd call it over. But this time I wave the shotgun in this hypnotic sort of tick-tock way, like the snakes that are known to slither into our luggage bay. Come on, baby, I hear Barb. Don't point at his face. Dory adds, she's out of harm's way now, in one of those voices where you can't control the shiver. He dropped the spork, surrendered. But see, LaTroy is still smiling, even with my barrel kissing his lips, which tells me the girls aren't fully in on the rules of our game. You hear that? You snatch their sympathy, towelhead. You want to go out a martyr? Because trust me, you're never flying another mile or seeing one more foreign cloud again. I tap in the barrel. LaTroy's mouth parts from the bitter metal taste. I'm grounded? For life? Then shoot me right now, sugar ass. Become my damn judge. Aiming at a stringy piece of turkey in his teeth, I prepare to pinch the trigger as our ladies start to scream. Why are they screaming? We already said we came by this gun same way we did the plane, only by virtue of its uselessness. No way will my pinching its trigger really unload any stored up lead. So relax. Thanks. So, how many people here are MFA students? Just to get an idea. Okay. And how many are second-year MFA students? There's a lot. Yeah. So I know that Jamie had mentioned to me talking, having a little talk about some of the ways that you can have a writing life without necessarily going right into academia, or maybe the other side of it, going right into a PhD program. So when I was finishing up grad school, I was at NYU, and to supplement the fellowship that I had won, I got to teach a section of Intro to Creative Writing in the last semester. And that did supplement my fellowship, but it was New York City, so I needed supplementing to my supplement. And I got an offer to work on 2 quizzes for teen girl magazines. And I think one of them was which character of a television show you were, and the other one was, is she your BFF or not? Here's ways to tell. So, I was glad to get the gig. I worked as hard as I knew how on quizzes that I had no real background or familiarity with. They took maybe 20 hours to do and to complete before the editor was satisfied. And I was paid nearly the same amount as teaching the entire NYU class. So this moment was instructive, and it imparted 3 lessons for me as I was on my way out the door for the MFA. Number 1, try to write more of those quizzes. Number 2, this country's priorities were even more skewed and distorted than I possibly could have imagined. And then number 3, the quizzes in the teen magazines were absurd, and it felt absurd doing it. But it also feels absurd to create characters out of black ink and put them on a page. So the market for quizzes in teen magazines is absurd yet conventional. And so I started realizing, the absurd yet conventional might be the way to provide the money and the fuel to allow me to keep writing the iconoclastic absurd material that I'd rather write. So that's what I did after MFA. I wasn't looking to get into a PhD program. I did want to stay in New York. I did know the costs of New York, so I had to find a way to make that work. And so I started talking to people about these kinds of jobs. I started getting recommended for those types of jobs, and I found out that those types of jobs were sustaining me financially, but they also started to fuel and inform my writing. And that was a wonderful and unexpected boon. So that's the triptych of stories there, because the first piece, as I mentioned, it's directly related to work that I've done as a food reviewer, and that job, like a lot of others, I think just more or less fell into my lap. The editor of the magazine that I first started writing reviews for, she came to me with the idea clear out of the blue. I told her I had no culinary training to speak of. She still insisted on it. I told her that I was still having difficulties using the George Foreman grill. She said, "No, just this is yours. This should be your section of the magazine." And I took it seriously, and I had fun with it too. And it wound up leading to more things. So I started working for Food Network, and they would have me speak with some of their chefs and spend the days with them. And I did more and more food reviews. I started judging seafood contests along people who had won Iron Chef and the New York Times best-selling cookbook authors, and you get great food. So that piece came directly as a result of that job. And then the last piece that I read, that's not as directly related, but when I was living in Mississippi for, I think it was about 4 years that we wound up living there, I didn't know at all how I was going to adjust my paid life to make it down there. And I started doing some work going to small towns and doing either profiles on the town or specific people in the towns. And I'd stay for a day or two, and you'd get the full tour, and you'd have the entire, you have the mayor, and you'd have the Chamber of Commerce alongside you for a day or two. And again, lots of fun. But one of the things that was interesting, I'd do the prep for these towns, and I'd bring up people who had come from them, and kind of the local boy makes good or local girl makes good. And a lot of times they would perk up and they'd be excited that I was bringing that person up, and they'd want to tell you about the personal connection that they had with that now famous celebrity, semi-celebrity. But then sometimes I'd bring up names, again, people that had made good, and the spit take was nearly visible from the people in the room, and it was like I had just crossed some line that I wasn't aware of, and you could tell that they didn't feel like they were part of the town anymore. And that, I guess I would imagine happens everywhere, but I was in the South, and I started seeing, I came to a lot of towns that were going through periods of great recession, or they were trying to build themselves up, and the idea that someone had spurned them in a way that they weren't even going to use their name to further them in the article was kind of interesting to me. And so that the third piece, I think, draws on the tone of that mood that I got. Not at all the characters, not at all the situation, but I couldn't have come up with that piece if I hadn't been in those towns and soaking up that atmosphere and seeing that it didn't just happen once, it didn't just happen twice, it happened 10, 12, 15 times I'd see this occur. And then in the middle is the longer piece, and that's the novel, and that's what it's all supporting. So the pieces, the gigs that I'm doing, the writing assignments that I'm doing, even if they are for conventional mainstream magazines, even if it's not it's in a voice that I have to kind of fake it to make it with the magazine, they still help me build into that, access the bigger project, and the project that is becoming increasingly intricate over time, and it takes more and more of your energy, and so you don't want to let it go, and so the way that you keep finding time for it is to take jobs like the others. So I did a lot of magazine work, but I did most of that after I moved down south. So when I was actually in New York, and I did do some work at Hearst, and I did some work for ESPN, the mag, and some of those places. I really kind of steered clear of magazines in general, and I wound up doing educational publishing and doing a lot of work in that field. And again, I'd started that kind of as a lark, and it was just it was supposed to be a one-time gig, but I wound up being hired as a full-time editor of an imprint, and they asked me to run my own imprint of books for a while. And then McGraw-Hill had me write science curriculum, and despite the fact that I read from a story that has an algebra teacher, don't be fooled. My math skills are deplorable. Tip conversion is my one trick. But you know, it was a really amazing experience because you think of a lot of the science and a lot of the technology that you take for granted, and then you suddenly have to explain triangulation and GPS to a fourth grader. And it's such a humbling experience, but it also is, again, weirdly good for your fiction. It is weirdly appropriate to be studying those things and to try to figure out how to break it down, and how you would break down similarly difficult concepts, or how you would break down areas of expertise for your characters, how they would know the world in a way that you don't. So first you have to research it and know it yourself, and then you have to figure out how they would describe it. And again, that does feed back into your writing world, into your artistic life. So this was, you know, a complete surprise and a lucky surprise. But I, you know, doing those jobs was, again, beneficial for financial reasons, beneficial because I was trying to put together the novel and a short story collection, and I wanted to have one book out before I got into academia fully. I'd seen a lot of friends who were older than I was, and they were working jobs with 5.5 loads, and they had given up on writing, basically. They were still teachers of writing, but it was like they were writers in name and theory only. And so they had entered it without the benefit of the PhD program, and just because they wanted to be part of that world so much. I did too. I love teaching, absolutely love it. But I knew somehow, kind of intuitively, after the first class that I taught at NYU, that if I got into that world just to get into it, that something would suffer, and I probably wouldn't let it be my writing. So I would somehow let it be my teaching, and that frightened me. So I did not want that world. I did not want to become that teacher. So I knew that to get away from that, I actually had to leave the world that I loved a little bit and do these other jobs. But they did feed into the work, and they gave me a lot of time. The economy was really going well when I was offered the editor position, so I didn't expect to be getting the offer, so I had just gotten married, and we didn't really need for me to take that position, and so just as a lark, I said, well, if I can do it for just 3 days a week at this pay, I could probably do it, and thinking that they would just slam the door on me, and they agreed, and they accepted, so suddenly I had that writing time that I needed, and if I had been seriously in negotiations with them, I would have folded like a cheap tent, but again, I thought that was going to be a non-starter. So yeah, just the way that the work feeds into the work that you do for pay feeds into the work that you are doing as a writer is good for your writing. It's good to expand your limits and your boundaries as a writer, and it also reminds you to stay aware and awake in the world. And I think sometimes that's the problem with getting into a PhD program, or at least getting into one too quickly. If I tell all my undergraduate students, wait a year before you go into master's school. Do something. I don't care what it is. I don't care if you're like relying on your parents more than you expect. Just know what it's like to be out in the world. And I feel like the same holds true between MFA and PhD if you choose that path. But there's something exciting about the freelance world and with the curriculum as well, where you're a generalist and where you get to research all these different topics that you know nothing about. You have limited time to prep. Maybe someone will accept a pitch and say, I need this in a week. I need it to be this many words. Maybe someone will say, we just lost the person who was going to do this article. Can you do it instead? And suddenly you have 2 hours to prep for an interview with the romance writer Jackie Collins, which I did. And you know, it's safe to say I had not read a word of Jackie Collins. So I had enough time to read 40 pages of her new book and to look over some of the old interview clips that she had done and some of the things that she was doing for this tour, just to get a sense of what she was like as an interview subject. And what was striking was that the people who were interviewing her were giving her these powder puff questions, and she had the pivot for every one of them ready. And it was like interviewing an athlete. You know, we just take it one day at a time. I just want to be part of the team. And she was doing that in her own way. And I thought, that's going to be a terrible article if that's all I'm doing. So I did some research on she and Joan when they were sisters and some of the trouble that they got in, and tried to like think of a couple of potential ways we could run with the interview. And then 2 hours later, I'm in her tour bus, and the photographer's with me, and we're talking, and it's going in that way that the other Jackie Collins interviews have gone. But then I know that she and Joan actually helped her leave her boarding school, and then they threw her uniform into the Thames River. And so I asked her about that, and she got a little excited about the fact that I knew this little trivia detail. And then I realized that she and Dear Abby had started it around the same time. So I asked her if she thought that she or Dear Abby had more influence on the sex lives of young girls over their careers. And this...
It was Jackie.
She was really humble about it, but she knew that she was responsible. And the weird thing was she became very passionate about talking about girls and sex, and she went into this rant where she started talking about the importance of taking oral sex seriously as a young girl. And all this time I'm listening to her, and the photographer is about to burst out laughing, and she's getting more and more amped up as we go, and she knows the recorder's there and it's on, and she's already allowed me free reign, so it's all there, it's all material. Now this magazine, I couldn't use descriptions of oral sex, but I and I don't know what it's going to make it into necessarily, but I can guarantee I'm going to use it for something. I don't know if it'll be another nonfiction piece or if it'll get its way into a short story, but taking that job as seriously as you try to take the food reviews or the short stories, that leads to more work, and it helps you start to make connections, and it helps you start to put things together that you otherwise might not. And my short stories, for those who have read the book, they take a lot of disparate elements and they throw them in the pot together. And so a lot of times you see characters who would never be at the same party, but they're there in that moment together. And so there's a lot of confluence, and there's also a lot of collision. And so you look at a job like this, like this kind of freelance work, and you get those moments. You get to see Jackie Collins out of her element a little bit. You get to really understand what a chef is putting into the gazpacho, and how they just love the fact that you identified that one ingredient. And then you take it and run with it on your own. And I think it makes you so much more alert to the world around you. And that's something that I think you can miss if you just follow a straight academic path. Not always, but I think that you get put into that tower too quickly, and that's the danger. So that's it in a nutshell. I think that it's worth noting that even though this is for MFA, the graduate students brought me in here, and this is for people who are thinking about how they maybe just want to make MFA their final stop and they want to get into their own world. It's worth noting that I've been asked to also give a speech on this very topic in a month from now for a PhD program. So everybody is dealing with that issue, and academia is definitely no fail-safe.